2002 or 2003. We were looking at fairy tales, specifically princess stories, and I was not a big fan of their structure. I found they featured very passive protagonists. Snow White, Rapunzel, all of them, they were rescued. And they didn't really do all that much to rescue in terms of action. I think Snow White swept the house of the seven dwarves, and that was the biggest thing she did. Otherwise, things happened to her, and I found it and I thought about the women in my own life, like my mom, my friends, my girlfriends. They would not wait around for somebody to rescue them. They would kind of just rescue themselves. And so I had this idea, what about a princess story which had a more active protagonist in it? And then I thought about fairy tales and the tropes involved there. And, it started off a bit more satirical, I'm going to have a joke about a talking frog, I'm going to have a joke about long hair. But the story morphed, and I realized I wanted to serve the protagonist a bit better. So I had all these initial thoughts about the book, but then I started working. And working and writing, I'd go to the cafe. I was a teacher for a couple of years there. Every Saturday I was writing away, and I had these lots and lots of paper notebooks. But, I got about halfway through, and that we're talking about 2 years worth of Saturday writing. And so then I started working as an accountant. And then I got laid off in 2008 financial crisis. And nobody was really hiring accountants. And so I was like, what do I do with all my time? And I decided to tackle this book. And I'm glad I did. It was winter in Canada, not a great time. Got up every morning, got out of the house was the most important thing, wrote in the University of Toronto Library, and it slowly came together. And by the end of it took I'd say about 10 months of concentrated writing to do it. But I was so pleased when it was done. It was kind of like it was out of me. That was the feverish part about it at the end. It was just getting this story out of me. And I looked for publishers in Canada, got a lot of rejection letters. What I realized about the publishing industry a little bit is they have certain themes they're going into the next year, and they're like, okay, I think we want to focus on cookbooks and immigrant literature and stories about cowboys. And if you don't fit in that publishing plan, you might not get looked at. Now, there's always exceptions and all that stuff, but I didn't have very much luck. But I wasn't too devastated by that. The story was out of me. I mean, it'd be nice if people read it, but I was just glad it was, I'm going to say it's a lot out of me. And so I eventually came back to Hong Kong, started working here, and my mom actually turned me on to the Proverse Prize. It had to be an unpublished work, and it was like, why not? Why not apply? There's nothing wrong with that. Now, I did not win, but but I did get published, which was actually the big key thing there. And it wasn't strange being published, but it wasn't as exciting for me as finishing the novel. And it's strange when people ask you to talk about it, because I never really spoke about it much. I was like, oh, it's a story. People had the worst question, tell me about your book. I'm like, okay, there's this girl, and she wants to help people, and, stuff happens. So it's been an evolving process for me to be able to talk about it. But, so that's essentially my biography, how the story came together. I spoke a little bit about what I was trying to do with the story, about a more active protagonist. You'll notice that it's very structured novel. That was one of the things I found when I was writing it. I guess that comes from the screenwriting course I took over one summer, where screenplays have a very structured format. You have your first act, which is about 1/4 of the play, 1/4 of the movie. Your second act, which is about an hour, and then your third act, where your climactic section, which is another half an hour. So that's where you get your movie from. And so there is that structure to this novel. And I also looked a little bit at Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which is, people have been able to translate that to Star Wars, to a lot of the famous Greek myths, and I wanted to use that structure a little bit. It helped me as a first-time writer, at least. So people have read it and have commented, oh, it feels like a movie. And there's a very good reason for that. It was, I don't think I ever designed it to be a screenplay, but that structure helped me in writing it. And help me. Yeah, I used to have a spreadsheet. Also, another little fact about the book, every chapter starts with the letter P. And so, there are 71 chapters plus a prologue and an epilogue. That was difficult. So I think one of the worst ones, Jillian and I fought about, I start one chapter with prostrate eyes, and she's like, why are you starting it this way? And I'm like, every chapter starts with the word of the letter P, and she's like, oh, there, here's the chapter, chapter 31. Prostrated eyes watched night slowly melt away. She's like, that's kind of a weird way to start a chapter. I'm like, you try starting every chapter with a word starting with the letter P. So there were some ins and outs on that. Yeah. I can keep talking, I'm not sure. Is there, and one of my rules here is I can keep wittering away, but it is also an hour. So if you guys want to help me out by asking some questions about it, that's fine. It was interesting speaking about it on the radio yesterday with Phil Whalen. Yeah, and he was very much talking about fairy tales and allegories and literature devices. And I remember at the Proverse event when somebody says, oh, how do you feel now that you've made a piece of literature? And I was like, oh, I'm not sure I would consider this literature. I think it's a great yarn. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a good story. It has good pace to it. That was one of the keys why I have so many short chapters. But it was, and there's definitely themes. I'm not sure too much about symbolism or any of the other stuff like that, but I was careful to have themes. I think it carries its way through. But it is much more, when I was writing it, for me it was a plot-based thing, making sure the reader doesn't get bored, make sure there's always something exciting, and characterization. That was a big motivation when I was writing. The character of Pet, I guess, kind of evolved and transformed the story. It sounds a bit cheesy when you're talking about characters, like they have their life of their own. But in this case, you're structuring a book around a character, and you want to make it believable, you want to make it somebody compelling. And I definitely want a flawed protagonist. She's not necessarily as nice as she could be in all circumstances. She can get angry. She can make mistakes. And that was important to me, that she does all those things. And so I was talking about earlier how I was treating fairy tale devices as jokes almost. When I took the character more seriously and her quest, that meant that a lot of the humor that was there for humor's sake got excised. However, there's still, I think, a humorous tone to it, and I use a narrative voice which might mimic my own a little bit. I think I use one phrase in particular. I was caught on it yesterday when I was doing a reading. It was the simple and obvious answer. And I use that all the time. And sometimes you do need that editor in there to help you be like, Victor, you used the same phrase like 7 times in 17 pages. You're like, oh, I just think it sounds nice. All right, so there's those little, you find yourself especially using the same using the same phrasing. A little bit sometimes, that's okay with the narrative voice. You had to be a little bit careful with characters and their voice. Something which was difficult, I guess, giving each character their own voice, but came to in the end. And yeah.
Would you like to describe the story?
The story.
Yep.
All right. Oh, story. I worked a lot on this back blurb, so I'm going to use this as my branching off point, and then we can go from there. Teen activist Pet Peasant has no time for administrative red tape. All she wants is an audience with the High Regent. Without changes in the law, her village will suffer. With her best friends, Pet sets off on a journey to the center of power. But events spiral out of control quickly. Terrifying monsters hunt her. Why? Is there something special about her? Pet's quest takes her across the realm, through a murky swamp tyrannized by an outlandish master, and eerie woods twisted by dark magic. As the stakes rise, her friends fall, and the drums of war sound louder, an incredible and inescapable truth dawns on Pet. I quite liked incredible and inescapable truth, but that's just me. I will read the prologue because it adds a different element to it than what the narrative is, and then I'll explain where it goes from there. It all starts off with this. The princess goes whoosh. Princesses are beautiful. This is a long-established truth. Even this princess, with her pink face, deathly wailing, and regular emissions of objectionable smells. But then again, she was just 6 months old. These things were to be expected. Despite her occasional messiness, the princess still brought a bright sparkle to her father's eyes. Unfortunately, the eyes of King Pyotr the Just were also filled with great sadness. Queen Polly had passed away during the princess's difficult birth. Though this was a crushing blow, the king never let that sadness diminish the love he felt for his daughter. Nurse Olgana supposed there was another reason King Pyotr loved his daughter so much. The king never had to change her diapers. That duty fell to her. Olgana not only had been King Pyotr's nurse, but also nursed King Pyotr's father before him. There were rumors that Olgana was the oldest living thing in the palace, but she was always quick to point out that the great oak tree in the sculpture garden had been there first. Shaking her head, Olgana began the long, spiraling climb to the top of the spire. She was too old for this nonsense. All the other royal infants had had their nurseries in the central keep, but only yesterday King Pyotr had abruptly moved the princess's nursery to the top of the spire without explanation. The idea of climbing up that narrow, treacherous staircase several times a day was unappealing, to say the least. After all, Olgana was not a young nursemaid anymore. Just as Olgana was reaching the 4th stair of many more to come, a voice rang out. "Nurse, have you seen His Majesty? I urgently need to discuss tomorrow's agenda with him." Grand Vizier Lear was his usual flustered self, cradling a massive pile of parchments. He craned his neck around the stack to make eye contact with Olgana. "No, I haven't. If I see him, I'll let him know you're looking for him." Olgana turned back to her scent. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 227 stairs to attend to." You might notice that character voices are not my strength. It was an intrepid journey, but eventually Olgana made it to the top. Their guardsmen, Isabob and Stan, glared at her with their steely eyes. Olgana did not mind. She knew it was all an act. Stan was probably hungover as usual, while Isabob was actually one of the most sensitive people she had ever met. "How's the weather doing up here, boys?" she asked. "Fine, nurse," Isabob retorted, as Stan opened the heavy oaken door for her, revealing that the princess already had some distinguished company. King Pyotr and Ivella, the court sorceress, were leaning over her crib and speaking in hushed tones. The conversation ended abruptly upon the entrance of Olgana. "They stopped?" thought Olgana. "On account of me?" In the past, Olgana was regarded as an old, albeit roving piece of furniture. Nobody ever stopped talking just because she entered a room. In her time, she had overheard talk of war, declarations of forbidden love, and whispered prayers. Not that she ever paid much attention, for Olgana took great pride in her absolute discretion. Therefore, being the seasoned professional she was, Olgana's face betrayed none of the offense she felt. "There you are, Majesty. Lear was looking for you." I'll attend to Lear. Ivella started towards the door. "Whatever he wants shouldn't interrupt this time with your daughter." It did not take a wise and experienced nurse to know that such a meeting would end poorly. Lear would almost certainly reject any suggestion made by Ivella. Their rivalry was well known in the palace. More often the king would consult Ivella for advice over the head of Lear, who was the official Grand Vizier. A shiver ran down Olgana's spine as Ivella passed. There was just something about that woman which did not sit right with Olgana. It had to do with... Wait! Was that an open window? "Who opened this?" demanded Olgana as she quickly strove over to correct the situation. "Cold winds do not help a child thrive." At this, King Pyotr stirred from his trance. "Leave it, Olgana." The kindly nurse obeyed, but her eyes did not mask her puzzlement. Did he not have the best interest at heart for his daughter? Perhaps he was not feeling well. Under ordinary circumstances, Olgana would have rushed over and felt the king's head. Within moments, she would have diagnosed the problem and prescribed a herbal remedy. However, this was not an ordinary evening. Something about the king was tense. Olgana said nothing, and despite all the wisdom in her body telling her otherwise, let the window remain open. Olgana turned her attention to the sleeping infant. She was just now beginning to grow hair. A single dark curl decorated her forehead. "I could wake her if you want. Her mealtime is approaching." "Let her rest," replied the king in a distant tone. "There is something I would like to discuss with you outside." "If we whisper, we won't disturb the princess." Olgana hastily adjusted the princess's monogram blanket with its proud and swooping P. "Nevertheless, would you please step out with me?" Olgana followed King Pyotr outside as he closed the door to the nursery. The heavy door shuddered into place. Isabob and Stan appeared as vigilant as ever. "I was hoping to discuss the princess's diet with you," the king began. "The princess's diet is perfectly fine, as it has always been," Olgana snapped. The kitchen prepares every meal to my exact specifications. I test everything before I feed it the princess, just as I did with you and your father before you. King Purtu's jaw tightened, but Organa was not yet done. What's going on here? Why this sudden move to the spire? What about that secret liaison between you and Ivella over the princess's crib? Isabob's eyes nearly popped out of the socket. He had never seen anyone address the king in such a manner. On the other side of the door, Stan struggled not to chuckle at Organa's audacity. A long pause hung in the air before the king replied, Nurse Organa, I appreciate how you think that our long familiarity entitles you to certain liberties, but let me assure you that in my capacity as king of the realm, I have the ultimate authority. I need not explain my actions to anyone. It would serve you well to remember that. That was not the response Organa was hoping for, but a quick glance at the king's resolute face convinced her that further inquiry would be futile. Just as she was about to mumble an apology, crash! So, this is the point where the princess goes missing. So the setting before, this is just when, I guess, Pet would be a child. The princess of the realm has disappeared, whisked off by the wind from her nursery. Then we cut to several years later, 17 years later to be exact. Our protagonist Pet lives in the seaside town of Seacrest. That name was not unintentional. And she's adopted. She knows she's adopted. She lives very happily. She's adopted by fishermen, which she isn't too pleased with because she hates the smell of fish. But, you know, she's good with numbers. She helps them do their taxes. She's living a happy life. She's also quite a good fencer. However, she's doing the taxes for the family fish business one day, and she realizes she is owing 1,000 gold pieces. And she's like, what the heck? And she examines the tax law, and they've changed the mariner's benefits, which she realizes is going to bring her fish-faring town of Seacrest into economic ruin. So she does what any good politically minded girl would do. She goes and talks to the magistrate. Says, Magistrate, listen, the town is falling into ruin. You need to stop this. And she realizes the magistrate's useless. He signed the bill, wasn't thinking about it, and the only way to overturn the rule is to go and talk to the High Regent. So she gathers her best friends, Judd and Candace, and they're joined by an older woman, Mrs. Kettlebot, who's inspired by Pet's fervor and want for political change and tax regime change. And they set off on what should be a relatively simple mission to correct some tax law. Well, it turns out that there's a cloaked man hunting down a girl coming from Seacrest. When the cloaked man reaches Seacrest, Pet and her friends have already left. So then he goes and pursues them. I won't go into any more of the details of the story right now, but there is another layer, as I showed you in the introduction, of a missing princess. I guess the question throughout it all is Pet this missing princess? Is it somebody else? So there's that added element to it.
She might be.
Yeah, she might be.
You can't tell.
You can't tell. There might be a slight twist there at the end, so I encourage you not just to take the title at its alliterative
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you're writing a story as long and complicated as that, do you outline?
Oh, definitely. I had an Excel spreadsheet, literally, and I worked. I had a very clear structure, and I talked about how important structure was. I initially wrote it, and then feeded the structure to it. I didn't want chapters to go on too long. You'll notice there's 71 chapters because I think the average is about 4 to 5 pages per chapter. There are longer chapters. That comes a little bit. I used to borrow some of my dad's thriller novels when I was on vacation, and those always had nice, short, punchy chapters, which always had a nice cliffhanger, which made you want to read the next one.
Yeah,
so I wanted
John Grisham.
John Grisham, yeah.
Also account.
Yeah, see.
He's a lawyer.
Lawyer, yeah. So I did have, and by the end, when I had an idea what the total page count would be, I wanted to make sure I fit in that because I didn't want to have too much glut in it. And so that was a very important part to me. So yeah, I did have a spreadsheet for that. I also had the spreadsheet to help me get the P's right in the beginning of every chapter. But yeah, structure was, I think, one of the driving aspects about how the writing works in it. maybe that shows my accounting a little bit.
When you were reading just now, I was a bit surprised by the pronunciation of the name,
Mm-hmm.
because I would have thought that name was pronounced Lear.
Lear. I guess I could. That's another example of a name which is on the nose. Yeah, I took names were fun to come up with. I like Ma and Pa Peasant. Those are her parents. Lear was good. Magistrate North was kind of just to be a reaction that they're in the southern province, so that he's a bit out of place in his job. Ivella is quite on the nose, but intentionally so. But I also wanted to emulate a little bit of the fantasy element to it. The one person's name I never really stuck with me, but I couldn't find anything better, was Candace, her best friend. It worked to a certain degree, but it never struck me. I like Pet, or Petunia. She doesn't like being called Pet, by the way. But there's Candace. Judd I like because it's a strong, simple name. There's Magistrate North, Piotr, Polly, Petunia. You get the sense there. I think Queen Polly was intentional because I want to have a little bit of discordance in it. I want people to realize this had a bit of a modern flair in it, and so that's why I went with Polly as opposed to. I can't even think of another woman's P name outside Petunia right now. I'm so
I
obsessed.
have another question.
Sure.
There's a lot of people that I've met. I know many people in Hong Kong that I don't know very well, but when I tell them about something, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be writing a book about that." But the fact is, actually, very few people follow through and finish writing a book.
It takes a lot of time. Luckily, I got fired. I had a lot of time on my hands. No, I mean...
So we're not waiting for the second book.
No, it actually...
You're working long hours.
It actually came up, would you write again? And if the circumstances were right, and I knew I had an amount of time, writing this gave me a respect about the amount of dedication and time you need to give for writing it all. It's 200-something pages. It's a lot of time. And then the editing process, and going back and the structuring, and multiple drafts, and fixing things which don't work, especially when I was writing. I would come up for ideas for stuff which I wanted to change earlier in the book, which is a bit irritating, and you're like, okay, then you go back and you're like, okay, I want to change this aspect of it, and you're like, okay, that changes this, this, and this, and this. You have to, why it's structured, you have to realize the knock-on effect of everything in your plot. If you take this person, if you decide to merge two characters, that was a big thing. I realized I had too many characters. So you want to start merging it, because I'm a big believer in economy of characters. You know, why have 5 characters when 2 will do? It just makes it easier in the book. On a side note, I always remember Charles Dickens starting off with those these are all the characters that are going to be in the book, the cast of characters, what they do, and I always referring back to them when I was reading them. So it's very important to me to try to keep the number of characters down so that people would just see a name and be able to catch up. Also, it's the worst when you put a book down for a couple of days and then you pick it up again and you're like, oh, who is this character again? You have to run back and go back to it. So, yeah, minimize the number of characters. But the original question was the time it takes. Enormous amount of time. And becomes obsessive. I have total respect to people who, also when you're doing it the first time, you have no clue anybody's ever going to like it. That wasn't, as I say, the intrinsic motivation for it. But if I had to rely on that for my income, that'd be a scary thing. So, work a lot harder. And I have total respect for people who are willing to take that leap. But I mean, you never really know if you're a good author or not. I mean, you show it to some friends, they're going to tell you it's pretty good just because they're your friends. And then you send it to a bunch of publishers, you're like, oh, maybe it's not. I mean, I'm glad I got it. And then, well, thankfully, Gillian Bickley came along and accepted it. There's some validation from that. But that was secondary. It was nice. But most of all, I was like, oh, this is out of me. I'll do something with it one day. But it's also an unending... Even yesterday, right before I was speaking on the radio, I was going through a passage and I realized I used the word protocols twice in one paragraph. I was like, darn! I was like, that's unnecessary. And just looking at it, even now, whenever I read it, I'm always like, oh, I wish I could change that and that. I would not make a well, somebody else can make a screenplay of it, if somebody has ever wanted that. But this one was definitely a book. It shares the structure of a screenplay, but I definitely wanted to have the characters' thoughts in there. and capture that element. And there are certain things you can do with certain genre, certain formats that you can't do with others. A clever little device for the deep mind, and then also the identification. I think names are very important. Like Petunia, shortened to Pet, was supposed to be a little bit of a joke. I mean, there's a P there, but also Pet is a bit, derogatory a little bit, but she's none of that. And so I wanted to have that little context in there. I had a lot of fun with the names. I played them out, especially when you decide to change a character's name halfway through, then you have to go back and change it all. So yeah. Luckily there's a find function in most computers now, which makes it a bit easier. But and I had to write it in notebooks, that just to keep moving forward, because if I typed on the computer, especially the first draft, it would be constantly going back, editing, constant files. At least to this day, I still have all the notebooks of the first draft in paper. Now, the narrative changes, and what's in that notebook compared to what was eventually typed, which I typed, is very different, but I needed to write in notebooks just so I kept going forward, because otherwise I'd just be going back and revisiting chapters, especially if I changed something, I'd go back and change that note. I wanted to make sure I got the entire thing out, and then go back and revisit it. I'd done a lot of it, the writing, maybe about halfway when I was still in London, and like on the Saturdays and writing on Saturdays and up to a little bit point in Canada. But I had to finish it in the notebooks and then go back and edit it, which meant bring my computer with me. And I had to go outside my house in order to do that, because I'm not sure about these people who can write at home, but I'm way too easily distracted by anything else I could be doing. So I need to be in a library with a computer, no access to the internet, and just typing away and getting it done that way. I do get frustrated a little bit. One of the big things I had fighting, not fight, but about the novel was, do I use my real name on it? Because I do have a second job. I work at HSBC. I work with fraud risk, which I really enjoy. But I remember reading once that lawyers in law firms, they were so sick of people going in working for a law firm and then writing their first legal novel on the side and then selling that and then becoming a legal novelist, that they started taking out candidates who had any literary background in their CV. And I was like, do you think that would happen to me? Maybe I should go with another name. I was thinking the name Leonard Sy, because that's my mum's maiden name, and Leonard, or maybe Edward Sy, which is my middle name plus my mum's maiden name. I'm like, that's a nice name. But Julia was like, no, use your real name, I'll sell more copies. And so I was like, and I was talking to my dad, I'm like, Dad, do you think this will cause me any problems in the banking industry? They come across my CV and they might look and see everything in the book. He's like, probably make you more interesting than other applicants. So I was like, fair enough. So yeah, I was glad with that. I have to point out my mum did the cover artwork. It was
very, very poorly, because we were in Brazil at the time on traveling, and I couldn't get hold of very much equipment. But Jillian, printer, did a very good job of overlaying.
Yes, and he's put it on it goes through to the back, which is
He
nice.
sort of took the original design
Yeah,
and
it's
sort of,
Quite neatly done.
with the theme, given that he probably hadn't read the book, he was quite good in using the sort of idea of lost in the...
Lost in the forest.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the original idea, though, the dimensions never worked, that this would be the front cover and this would be the back cover with the forest, but just it didn't, the frame and what we had with us didn't work. But I'm quite happy with it. I like it how it captures like the light going into the darkness. There's a dark wood she goes to, and her land where her destination's on the other side. So I'm very pleased with it, how it captured the thing. My one thing about it was that I don't specify any ethnicities in this novel. There's a little bit about hair color, because I wanted to capture some of the obsession with hair that go on with fairy tales. A lot of them love hair. Rapunzel, Snow White's hair was dark as night, so I wanted to capture a little bit about that. But one of the things I intentionally did, there's nothing about like the color of anybody's skin in it. I wanted people to read into it what they wanted to, and so I wanted to have a like stylized figure. I didn't want to have too much of an identity. I wanted to make it very readable into whoever, and so. It is set in more of a traditional European like fantasy environment, but that was one of the intentional things, is I wanted to not have anybody have to read into it too much.
And I think it was quite good that it does look like an adolescent. It doesn't look like a child, and it doesn't look like an adult, it does look like an adolescent, and I think that was particularly good. You must have done that on purpose.
Yes, I did.
Yes, but it worked out very well, I thought.
No, I'm very pleased with it. There's a nice little touch to it, so added. But it was very important to me to make it standalone. because I'm so sick of trilogies or multiple phase books. Like, I'm like, oh god, like you read a book, and you're like, oh bloody hell, I have to read 2 more. Like, what happened to editing? That was like, I'm also the increased page count in books these days. They just go on forever. Like, and the problem if you're publishing an 800-page book, I'm thinking the one which won the Luminaries, the one Eleni Cantor or something. 800 pages. You get trapped in this mesmerizing circle. But if you're writing a book for 200 pages, making people go on an 800-page journey with you, you better stick that landing. You better make it the best ending ever, because otherwise you're like, oh, that was it? Like if it had been 400 pages, I would have gotten a lot more virtue. So I'm a big believer in the editing process. I believe you should have a story you want to tell. I'm a bit over these ongoing book series. I mean, you know, so I might have a sequel, but the sequel exists by itself as well.
You're not going to have the 5th Perilous Messenger.
I did have an idea for one called Queen Pet, where she's at the end of her life and like all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I have other ideas of where to take it. But as I say, you know, it's a factor of do people want to see it, and will I have the time to do it?
Yeah. So I think at that point we should thank Victor very much indeed.
Oh.
Thank you, Victor.
I want to thank you all.